Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is with very great pleasure that I welcome you here to Clifton College for our Youth Education Debate 2014. Let's begin with some very simple housekeeping. If I could ask members of our audience, please, to turn off your cell phones, or at least put them onto airplane mode. And also, you'll see we have a number of cameras here officially filming the debate. Please do not take your own private cam of this. Okay, we will edit the film, and we prefer not to have other delegates aside. They know they're going on YouTube through the Film Academy. We don't want other clips popping up from other angles and things like that, if you don't mind, please. It's my very, very, very great pleasure to welcome our delegates here to the stage. I'm going to introduce them very quickly, and then we'll move on and give them the opportunity to make an opening statement. I'm going to start to my furthest right, from the ruling party, the ANC, Mr. Ntuthuko Makomboti. He is the president of SASCO, the South African Students' Congress, which is a body allied with the ANC, also a member of the ANC Youth League, and he will be speaking for them and the ANC this evening. Next to him is Ndeni, a friend of Clifton from Underberg. He's a community leader and member, very interested in politics and education, and he'll be bringing a slightly different perspective on things this evening. And we thank you for stepping in at the last moment. And then next to him, Mbali Ntuli. She is from the Democratic Alliance, and she's a DA youth leader. We are hoping that in the next 15 or 20 minutes, our friend from the EFF, Jackie Shandu, will arrive, and if that happens, we'll take a brief pause to mic them up, and we'll take the debate from there. Just to explain a little bit more to our audience what the purpose is this evening. You are not going to be seeing a US-style presidential debate where I grill the candidates and put them under the microscope and things like that. That is not the purpose of this evening. It is an opportunity for the delegates to debate amongst themselves, and we might see some of that. There were some already as we were preparing, and very much an opportunity for us to ask questions about where the parties stand on various issues and the practical measures that they're going to be using to take South Africa forward. I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to invite members of the audience to ask some questions as well. In terms of the length, we are going to play it by ear. We're looking to finish in around about an hour and 20 minutes or something like that. We will see how we go. It may not go that long. We may have to cut things short. I have gone through the question and topic areas with the delegates, so hopefully there won't be any surprises. Let's begin. We're going to start by allowing each of the members on stage here to give a brief introduction, tell us who they are from their side, and give a brief statement about what their party believes about education. So let's stick with the order I established earlier for now, and I'd like to ask my comrade from the ruling party, the ANC, Mr. Makomboti, a brief introduction, please. What have you got to say?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity that you have given us today to come and speak about our manifesto and the African National Congress. The African National Congress is an organization which is 102 years old, which liberated South Africa, participated in leading the liberation of South Africa. When we took over the education system in South Africa, we took over from more than 4 education systems from apartheid. And as we could have seen and noticed over the past 20 years, we've been able to stabilize the education system in South Africa to one single education system, which of course faces difficulties, but we are committed to working around those. And we have made significant progress over the past 20 years to ensure that we increase the access of those who were disenfranchised during the period of apartheid. So more and more black students have been able to access education and access education for free. We've got a number of students, about 7 million young people, who go to Northeast schools in South Africa who would have not been able to get an opportunity of education because they were disenfranchised historically. And we've also been able to ensure that as part of ensuring that as a child is able to learn at school, they are able to have some food on the table. We've ensured that we introduce the school nutrition scheme, which caters for over 9 million young people in South Africa. We know the challenges that are facing the education system in South Africa. We have introduced what we call ANA, the Annual National Assessments, which really tell us directly where the challenges are. And we've noted the challenges that we face from the transition from foundation level of basic education at grade 3 to jump to the intermediate level of grade 4. Though there are challenges of literacy and numeracy there, we've seen major challenges of dropout rates of young people at grade 7 level up to grade 11. These are things that we have already assessed and been able to identify and been open to the country about those challenges, and we know exactly what we need to do to fix those problems. So we believe that South Africans should really give us another mandate to be able to implement what we have already started in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Denny, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and discuss your interest in these areas that we're discussing this evening.
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to tell you a bit about myself. Does this work?
I think I can hear you.
Okay. I'm just going to tell you a bit about myself. Okay, my name is Undeni Zamanda from Annenberg. I run a supermarket in Annenberg, a local supermarket. So, and I care about my community a lot, which is why I've gotten involved in mostly education and politics. I'm really passionate about my community. And I can hear what the ANC has got a lot of good stories to say, but I've seen in Annenberg those stories become destroyed into nothing. In the last few days, we had special things. Some of you know what special things, right? A group of policemen got drunk and beat up young men and died. They have not been in jail. The next morning they came shopping through the store like nothing has happened. From a Monday to a Friday, from all the schools that are in Annenberg, they all come to the store that I manage, and they all get food from there. Because all the ladies that have got tenders to supply food to these schools have never ever come through shopping to buy groceries for these schools. So they come and so they get our day-old bread and day-old rolls. That sort of thing. So I'm passionate about education, and I would love to help any political party, which is why I don't have a political hub that is passionate about our people and fixing our education system. And another reason why I came here and is because it's so absolutely so refreshing to finally hear the DA and the ANC debate about something that actually matters and not Nkandla for the first time. We have been debating about Nkandla, which I think is a non-issue. We all have forgotten our health system, we've all have forgotten our education system. We've forgotten so many things that actually matter. Every newspaper, if it's not dominated by Oscar, is dominated by Nkandla. Things that really don't affect the small man on the street. Things that don't affect our small communities if you care about your small community. Because we can only start fixing violence things if we fix them one at a time. And we can fix the big ones. And that's how I am involved here in politics and education.
Some strong feelings there, and definitely some of those topic areas will come up later, and there'll be an opportunity for people to respond to some of the things that you've said. Mbali from the Democratic Alliance, if you will introduce yourself and tell us your party's position, please.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to say good evening to you guys, and I'm really happy to see so many young people that have come out for the debate, because I think that whilst you guys are the school that can afford you to have quality education, once you leave Clifton, the majority of you, when you go to universities, are going to actually realize the dire straits that our education system is in, and what other young students who are your age have actually been experiencing, and why it's so critically important that we speak about education, because without it, I think we all realize that you really don't have a future in South Africa. So I'm going to touch a little bit about the DA, and then I want to actually just talk a little bit about what my colleague on the side has said. And the first thing that I can say as a Democratic Alliance is that we understand that the ANC has done a lot in terms of allowing access to education in our country. We know where we come from as a country in terms of our past. But even now, 20 years on, that access hasn't resulted into actual quality education. Which is why in the Democratic Alliance, when we took over the Western Cape, we made sure that we took our education system very seriously and we started with the basics. And basic things like making sure that your teachers are in classrooms in time, making sure that we aren't hamstrung by unions that are constantly making our children be a political football when they actually want to achieve things with the ANC instead of being in the classrooms. Making sure that those schools have actual resources, actual facilities, so they're able to compete with students that are across the world in terms of being able to have the same quality of education. Making sure that when we speak about quality education, we're also speaking about making those teachers be held to account. So we want to see what are the school principals doing, what are the performance rates of those schools, what are the matric pass rates. Because you can have access to education, but you could be in a mud school and you could be learning nothing. So those are the kinds of things that we need to be saying as a Democratic Alliance, as Young People in South Africa, we want to make sure are actually being rolled out to all young people. So that's the basics of our offer when it comes to education, so we get those kinds of basics right, and then we start looking at things like the curriculum and making sure that we are actually able to have a curriculum that allows our young people to be competitive in the world. So at the global rate of which we are actually, advancing in the world, it really doesn't help us when our government hasn't sat down with, one, our universities, and two, our businesses to say, what are the skill shortages? What should we be teaching our children? What will make them competitive? What are the new things that are coming up in the world that will put them on level with those people or above them? So that's really where we take our education policy from. We said we need to firstly get students into schools, good quality schools, with food, with teachers that are there that are teaching them the right things. And we need to make sure that our curriculum and the management of those teachers is actually done right. Because I think if any of you have ever experienced having a bad teacher who hasn't been fired, you know how much it can set you back in your studies. So that's really important to us. And then I want to speak a little bit about the issue of Uganda, just because it came up now. And to say that whilst it might be something that has been in the news for a long time, Uganda is very symbolic of what has gone wrong in our country. And that there is rampant corruption that is actually taking money away from young people being able to get these very things that I'm talking about. So Uganda might be boring because we keep reading about it, but if we don't keep hammering on about what it actually means if we have 246 million sitting in somebody's house, what that means is that there are students that can't go to university, it means that there are students that aren't getting food at school, it means that there are students that aren't being able to access tertiary and other opportunities that should be helping them. So Uganda and all the issues of corruption that come up are essential to young people, because at the end of the day, when you try to get to university, somebody's going to tell you that because you are a white male, you can't make it because we don't actually have the kind of schemes that will allow you to be under there. And so it's a very big and important issue.
Thank you. I believe I have to give a round of applause to you. I desperately don't want to get mired down on this issue, but I think it's fair to two pretty impassioned attacks their level at the ANC. So Mark, a very brief response from you, please.
I think maybe let's deal with the elephant in the gun and maybe put this issue aside. We quite frankly don't agree that 246 million, whatever, should be spent in the house of the president. And we've said this quite clearly. Maybe let's repeat this again. We don't really agree to this. But we believe that we must not use issues as political footballs. Let's really deal with the real issues. What is Uganda? I agree with Kumari that Uganda symbolizes some ill in our society. Uganda is just but a drop in the ocean of the corruption, the sea of corruption that is in South Africa. And this corruption is not only in the public sector, it's not only in government. That's what the DA doesn't tell us. Yeah. That there's a lot of corruption. Yes, very much. There's a lot of corruption happening in society. Why? Corruption is a byproduct of the system that we have in society. Capitalism, that's what no one wants to enter into this topic today. Unfortunately, the EFF is not here yet. Probably will agree with me, but not maybe when Julius Malema says that wearing Louis Vuitton shoes is inspiring the poor. How many Ugandans will we have under Julius Malema, for instance? I wanted to ask you. But I wanted to say that we need to look at Uganda as a problem that we really need to deal with in society as a whole. The whole question of greed in society, the whole question of corruption. How is it acceptable in opulence? How is it acceptable in South Africa, for instance? Let's come back over here. That you have got schools that are so resourced like the one we have today. And then you have got schools in Khayelitsha and Gugulet in the Western Cape that are dilapidated. That's the type of opulence that is there in our society that we need to deal with. We must not look at an issue and only individualize it to a particular person called Jacob Zuma. We need to look at corruption within its full context so that we are able to really deal with it and really change the economic system of the country. That's what we need to do. If we're not going to do that, we're just putting a blaster in the way. Thank
you. I think you've given a fair. I'm not saying that issue is done, but it's done for this evening. Thank you very, very much. Let's try and bring our focus back to education. South Africa is a developing nation, as we all know. And I think we've heard from all the parties that we agree there is a problem with access and a problem with funding. This is something that nobody is debating. And we'll look at some of the finer challenges later on. But if we agree on that, the point of agreement, we know there's not enough money in South Africa. If I could ask, once again I'll go through each of the delegates, what is the next biggest challenge for South African education? It may well be linked to funding. If we put economics aside, what is the next biggest challenge? Mr. Makamoti, we'll start with you again.
Well, one of the challenges that we have in our education system is lack of adequate infrastructure, particularly in our historically disadvantaged schools and historically disadvantaged institutions of education as a whole. Go to historically disadvantaged colleges. Go to historically disadvantaged universities. We have a few here in KwaZulu-Natal. We've got the University of Zulu, which quite frankly, as it stands, does not really appear to be a university where there is really academic progress. That's the challenge that we're facing, because there's no adequate infrastructure. Because what we did in 1994, we said, let's allow us young people to enter into our institutions, to come into our schools. But the challenge was, even though we have to do that, how do we ensure that we resource these schools to be able to take up the numbers that we're talking about? And of course, we could not say, as the DA suggests, let's talk as they did in the Western Cape. They closed down 26 schools because they're poorly performing and said they want to fix quality first. We can't. We don't have that choice. We don't have luxury to say let's halt access and fix the issues of quality. We have to do them concurrently. And that's the challenge that is facing South Africa. The whole question around access to quality education is linked to that. The problem is we are producing a lot of school children who do not have quality education. Even in our universities, it's a reality. That is why we are sitting with a number of students who are undergraduates. We are sitting with a number of students who are not in education, who are dropouts, who are not in education, not in training, they are not in employment, about 3.4 million in South Africa. So these are the challenges that are really facing our education system. What do we do to absorb these 3.4 million young people who are on the streets back into education? And what we have been able to do as the ANC government, we've now introduced new opportunities for post-school education. It's not only just the mainstream. Finish your high school, go to university. You can go to a FET college. We're opening the space. We're now introducing community colleges. We're introducing training centers, learnerships, to have a variety of access points for young people to be able to access education. The question of staffing provision. The problem that we have in our schools is that we have got a teacher-student ratio that is really ridiculous, beyond 40 students in a class. And that talks to the real challenges that we are facing. And the challenge in rural schools. Unfortunately, the best of the teachers that we produce don't want to go to the rural areas. What do we do about that? How do we incentivize them to go and teach in the rural area? So those are the challenges, I think, beyond funding are confronting our education systems.
Thank you. I'm going to move now to Mbali. The DA was mentioned there as closing schools in the Western Cape. I'm not sure if you want to respond and then make your own point in terms of what you would see as the greatest challenge, perhaps outside of pure funding.
Oh, definitely. Because what my colleague forgets to mention is that the ANC closed over 40 schools around the country for spurious reasons, whereas the reasons that we had closed the schools in the Western Cape was because they were in country and didn't have enough students, and we took those students and put them into better schools that were better resourced and were able to give them a better quality of education, which is why we continue to have the best education system in the Western Cape. So, I mean, if we're not going to talk about taking small examples of things, I think that my colleagues should be honest about the actual situation. And then moving on to other hindrances to education in South Africa, I think my colleague is absolutely right, and I touched this in my opening statements. Access to quality education in South Africa still remains one of our biggest things, and underneath that you have to put resources, obviously, because a child from Clifton is not going to compete with a child from a rural white school in the Eastern Cape. But more and above that is the quality of our teachers. And unfortunately, we have a situation in our country where teachers are not really being registered with the right kinds of boards. Anyone can decide now that they're going to be a teacher, and because it's become such a unionized program, teachers are actually at the behest of their unions as opposed to be actually making sure that they're in classrooms and teaching children. And so what you have is something like we saw last year when our Minister of Basic Education responded saying that most of the grade 6 teachers, I think 46% of them, couldn't do the same tests that they were setting for their grade 6 learners. Now that is a big problem, because if the people that are supposed to be teaching those children how to do basic literacy, maths and numeracy, and they can't do it, then obviously those children are going to go through an entire education system without ever being able to compete and ever being able to actually have the access to quality education that they need. We need to look at the pass matric rates and the dropout rates that we have in South Africa, because my colleague is boasting about the education system. But the fact of the matter is, in South Africa, if you get 33% now, you consider somebody who's passing on through the system. And I can assure you, you're not going to get into university, you're going to sit at home. And that's something that we need to look at and something that we need to improve. And again, the only way you improve it is by making sure that you've had the right kind of conversations with schools, with business, with universities, about how we can make sure that we are channeling our young people into the right places. And it takes a lot of will. It's not something that's easy, and it's not something that you turn around in a quick amount of time. But we need a government that's able to actually do that, and that isn't preoccupied with making sure that they and their public servants and their cronies are actually the ones that are benefiting alone from the education system, when we know that they're sending their children to schools like this, but the rest of us are going to mud schools. And then I want to talk about just a little bit about the fact that South Africa right now is considered third last in the 63 countries in Africa when it comes to maths and science. We don't even feature when it comes to things like arts and culture. So again, we have a system where we're not getting the right people to be able to teach our children the right kinds of skills that will make them competitive. And everything else from that follows. So, I mean, you can have everything else, but if you don't have the right teachers, you don't have the infrastructure, then you're not going to have a schooling education system that's going to be able to produce learners that are going to be able to do something with their lives afterwards. Those are the challenges, and in the Western Cape, we've done a great job of making sure that we speak to business, that we're speaking to feeder schools, to make sure that we have the kind of relationship where we can match students with teachers, bring teacher ratio downs, and make sure that in Khayelitsha and Bukuletu, we have Wi-Fi access to those schools. We have libraries that those children are able to access. Unlike anywhere else in the rest of the country, those entire places now are able to have world-class facilities for their students.
Thank you very much. There's a number of debatable points there which we are going to get to later. Teacher access, teacher training and things like that. So we'll get there later. And then if I can ask you, in your community, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the children in your schools?
Absolutely. First of all, the idea that politicians debate think that you can fix education as a standalone is really a poisonous delusion. You can't, because there's a various number of problems. One is purely being politics. When a child finishes matric, the first thing they hear on radio and television and newspapers is how useless the matric is, from every single politician and from every single radio host, debating on how useless the matric is and how you can't achieve anything with the matric. Number one, that demoralizes the child. That's done. Number one, the market is not designed to hire students who've gone to masters. You know what it does to a child? After seeing your sister who's got a psychology degree or a law degree coming back and being a cashier at your local supermarket. So you can't fix education in the standard. First of all, we have to make education attractive. The kids have to be able to see that, hey, you can get educated, get your degree, and you're going to be successful. Not listen, you don't have to get educated, get him that's going to be educated, you're going to be successful. So we have to make education more attractive by fixing everything else and make it more attractive than gangsterism that is currently happening.
Thank you very much. There are other issues. And then you've taken me perfectly into our next point, and it's going to allow me to turn to the students now to ask some of their questions. I'm going to be coming to Gareth first, if you can get himself ready, please. We do want to know a lot about matric and matric pass rates, what it's worth and that sort of thing. Gareth, I think we'll have a shift up in the order now as we move into the next round. So if you could address in Bali, please, for your question, we'll then give the other delegates a chance to deal with that. Gareth, what is your question?
The current matric pass rate sits at 72.8%. Sorry, 78.2%. But according to analysis last year by the DA, the number of students who passed matric is compared with the number of grade 10 students who attended public schools in 2011, real pass rate works out to be 41% rather than 78.2%. How do you plan to improve the situation and fix this drastic dropout rate?
Thank you, Gareth. That's a great question. And you're absolutely right. And that reason for the matric pass rate to be completely inflated is because of the high number of dropout rates that we have, which actually take people out of the schooling system and inflates the dropouts and the matric pass rate in the Northwest and the Free State, for example, which are the highest. As we've said, well, as I've said before in this debate, the Democratic Alliance, if you look at the pure statistics, is actually still the best performing province when it comes to matric pass rates. And that's because of the things that we've put in place. The basics, where we make sure that we are holding people to account, especially teachers and especially principals. We're making sure that we have school district members that are going around and ensuring that schools that are not performing are given the support that they need, and making sure that schools that are performing are given more leeway to be able to access resources and to be able to make sure that they continue doing the good work they do. We also incentivize teachers who are doing very well, because currently in South Africa, if you're a teacher who's really good, you can only really get salary increases if you go, sort of higher in the education runs. But we say that we'd like the teachers to continue to teach and incentivize them by making sure that if they're doing a good job, they are able to actually get a bonus for that. That's how you incentivize people to want to continue to do a good job. We also make sure that basic things like school feeding schemes are working in the Western Cape. So you don't have children that are going to school hungry and unable to concentrate during their classes. And those are just the basics that we try to do to make sure that our education system is right. But also when it comes to textbooks and the delivery and the management of schools, we make sure that every single year as the Democratic Alliance, we have been able to deliver schools on time to every student, and more importantly, the right books, which you're not seeing in the rest of the country, and I think that speaks volumes about why the education system in the rest of the country is dismally not doing so well.
Mdeni, I'll come to you to give a response. I thought, Mdeni, you've already commented that you've seen this in your community. Is there a high dropout rate? Are you aware of this? You commented specifically on the trip. Are you seeing children dropping out along the way?
Yes, we definitely do. And as soon as they do, obviously it creates another problem. They're going to drugs and do all sorts of funny crimes and all sorts of things. Yeah, we do definitely see the high dropout rate. And it's many reasons. When I went to primary school a few years ago, you either have to walk for 2 hours to go to school, or your mother has to pay an extra 8 rands for a taxi. Now, if your mother earns 800 rands a month working on some farm, you can't afford for you to get into the taxi. So you are going to have to work. So in winter, you're going to drop out because it's that color you can't afford to choose. So when you get to school, you're back from hungry, you get to school, the person who's supposed to be cooking hasn't even bothered to show up. So the only thing that's going to save you is a free roll from your local supermarket. So it's quite scary what's happening to young people.
Mr. Makaboto, we're painting a fair picture. What's the NC's response?
I think firstly, we can't use the Western Cape as a panacea to all our challenges in the education system. The reality is that the Western Cape has recorded more public service delivery protests than Gauteng, for instance, of late. The reality is that the Western Cape, yes, and these are issues that also range from questions of education. It's not just issues that are talking about, the issues of the community. The reality is that the Western Cape, for instance, do not even come first with the military pass rate. That's the reality. So we must not use Western Cape as a... And let me also deal with this issue. The apartheid system, I know everybody doesn't want to hear the word apartheid, but we can't run away from it. Yes, it's 20 years of a system that lasted for more than 300 years. Apartheid invested a lot of its resources in the Western Cape. That is why you must not compare Western Cape and other provinces on the same level. Apartheid invested a lot of its resources, and apartheid capital really invested to ensure that the privileged benefit in the Western Cape. But if we go to the Western Cape, yes, she can talk about these statistics about the fact that the Western Cape, we don't dispute this. It's our report, by the way, of the government, of our government, that says, honestly, from the Office of the President, that the Western Cape, for instance, has a lower dropout rate of students. And now, go to Kaileji, go to Bukuleju, and see the challenges that our young people are facing. The reality is that in the Western Cape, service delivery is racialized. That is the reality in the Western Cape. And let me say this. If a DA is honest to say we've got the best education system in the Western Cape, why in the Western Cape, where you've got the majority of the people who are black, and when I say black, I mean Indian, colored, and African, who are not employed? About 62% of the people who are in senior positions in the Western Cape are white males. 12% are white females. The rest are there, 8%, about 8%, it's colors. Now this is not even similar, not even anywhere close to the demographics of the Western Cape. Now that is a crisis. So if you're saying we're producing good producing good people from our basic education system, why are we not employing them? They even say that, well, I was in a debate today with Bali's colleague Yusuf, and he was saying on Power FM today that look, we are also having better outputs in our universities. And I asked them the same question: where are these graduates going if they are not being absorbed in employment in the Western Cape, both in the public and the private sector? So that's a challenge that we want to pose to the DA. But let's deal with the question that Garrett raised here. The reason why we've got a poor pass rate in matric, we need not to look at just matric. We need to look at the other grades. Where is the problem? And we released ANA as the ANC government, the annual national assessment, that actually pinpoints the problem, what I was raising in the beginning. The problem is at the foundation level for education. That is why the ANC said, no, let us introduce and pay more focus to early childhood development. I know that most of you went to grade R, but many young people, similar to you, your age, who are coming from poor schools around the province and around the country, did not get the opportunity to go to grade R. And some of you, even I know with my siblings, my younger siblings and my nieces and nephews, they are able to access very good foundation, early childhood development. Even before grade R, they have about 2 years of schooling before that. That lays a very concrete foundation for them. The question of language is central to this, because African children, and from grade 1 to about grade 3, have studied in their own indigenous language, and they have to transit at grade 4 to English as a medium of instruction. So that also poses challenges. And if you are a student who is a born English speaker, you are likely to perform better. Even in universities, that is the case. So we really need to look at these things. How do we then fix them? And what do we need to do? And that is why we, as the NCS, say, early childhood development, focus on numeracy and literacy, get more teachers of maths and science, put more money to fund you guys who are going to be going to universities, going to study to become teachers of maths and science. And we hope that some of you here can take up the challenge to go and teach in our rural schools so that we fix the education system in South Africa. It's not only the job of government, it is a societal issue. And once we start to own up to the education system and not use it as a political football and say, no, we have got the best system in the Western Cape, let's go to the Western Cape. I've been to the Western Cape a number of times. That's not the reality on the ground. The poor and the working class in the Western Cape still decry the government of the Western Cape. Thank you.
Mbala, a brief response from you?
Thank you. Let me just start by saying, if it is true that the apartheid government poured so much money into the Western Cape and that's the reason for our success, why is it then that for 15 years the ANC was not able to achieve what we've achieved in 5 years? Because quite frankly, even in other places, you guys have not been able to achieve that. So I don't think you should be using a cop-out to say that that's what happened and that's why the Western Cape is performing so well, because you were there first and you made a monumental mess of it that we've come and cleaned up and made far better than the ANC is like everywhere else in the country. When you speak about service delivery protests that are happening in the Western Cape, far more happening around the country against the ANC government. And the ones that are happening in the Western Cape are the ones that are led by your colleagues in the ANC who are throwing poo around everywhere, because that is the caliber of leadership we can expect from the ANC. Then when we speak about the graduates and where they're going, 73% of them, which is the highest in the country, are going to UCT and going to Rhodes and going to Wits and going to universities because they actually have a quality education and a quality matric that will be able to access and get them to there. And then on top of that, when they get out, they actually get into apprenticeship programs, they get into internships, they get business opportunities for artists to start businesses, and they get skills and work programs like the youth-based subsidy, which you and your people in Lusatu actually opposed, making sure that young people in South Africa for 3 years weren't able to access that. So that's where our young people are going in the Western Cape. We're actually preparing them for the workplace. And as for your stats, I don't know where you're getting them, because I've been to Khayelitsha and I've just read the episode that's come out now, which says that the Western Cape has the most employed number of people of colour actually in senior management positions. And they get there because it's based on merit, not because they know somebody who knows somebody who got them a job. So that's the difference between the Western Cape when it comes to the issues that you have raised. But I think that it's an indictment on you that you would go to the Western Cape and use it as an example of things are not working. And clearly, as you say from your own government's reports and from your AG, it's been proven that the Western Cape is the best performing province in the country. What you failed to say is that the very things that you pointed out about the Western Cape are happening in 8 other provinces. The ANC, after 20 years, is still not being able to do anything. So let's not take small issues in Khayelitsha and Hugulia to where I've been and I've seen the people that are doing really well and say that those things are not working, whereas we can go and look at 8 other provinces, Kwamashu, Umlazi, all these places here, where you fail to mention that the ANC government is doing worse despite having more money and despite being in power on that.
We're definitely not going to reach agreement this evening. A number of issues have come out during what all of the delegates have said thus far. We've mentioned those who are supposed to be supporting our learners, the teachers. We've even heard from Ndeni about people who are supposed to be providing food and things like that, not doing their jobs. So Liam King, who I believe has swapped his question. I would like the question, please, referring to Clifton and those statistics. Thank you, Oliver. If you could ask your question, please.
Earlier this year, the Minister of Higher Education and Training, Clifton Zamani, defended the 30% pass requirement for 3 out of 6 subjects needed to pass matric, saying young people would miss out on post-school education opportunities if this pass mark is raised. Why do so many students struggle to pass at this level? Does this mean that a large number of teachers do not have enough knowledge in their subjects? Does your party believe the standards need to be raised?
I'm sure you're going to have to want to give in a half a response and then to deal with that question, please.
Well, I think we agree definitely that we need to do more to improve our education system, particularly the training of our teachers. We must not forget that the teachers that we have in our schools, particularly in our schools, are teachers who are product of Bantu education. And that's a fact. They were taught through Bantu education, and they are teaching our children. So there is a challenge that we have. But unfortunately, we don't have the luxury in South Africa to say, well, if you were taught in Bantu education, let's put you aside. Let's wait up until we produce proper teachers. Unfortunately, as the ANC, we take responsibility. We are saying, it's us that are saying, we made a mistake. And by the way, as SASCO within the ANC, we have been raising this issue. And the ANC at least has been listening to us. That we made a mistake by closing teacher colleges. We made a mistake by closing teacher colleges because of the very neoliberal policies that the DA is subscribing to, offer lean and mean government. We said, no, we need to reduce public spending. And we did that, and we made mistakes, and we did it, and we have acknowledged it. So now, the issue about the 30% pass rate, what I think we need to understand in the context of what the minister was saying, is that the problem with South Africa is that we believe, we are taught in our schools that once you leave high school, you should go to university. I went to university, and I regret it. I mean, I see there were a few of my friends who actually went into internships, went into learnerships, and are working with Transnet today. They went to those programs. I've got many friends who went to go and work who went to go to FET colleges, and they really got practical training, and they are working, and they've been able to access employment. The reality is that if I graduate with a Bachelor of Arts degree, it's very difficult to find employment. That's the reality. So we need to be really pushing young people to train. We've got an inverted logic in South Africa. We've got more students who are in universities than those we have in FETs. And unfortunately, that's when we disagree with the National Development Plan. Even government disagrees with it on this particular issue. Quite clearly, that the targets of the National Development Plan still sustain the same issue, that we have more students in universities than those who are in colleges. And we're changing that around, because it's unsustainable for a developing country like ours. We need more students who are in training, more students who are going to be able to do practical work. We need more plumbers, we need more boiler makers. That is where we need to go as a country to be able to be successful. But yes, we are doing much more to ensure that we improve teacher training. That's an issue really linked to the question of teacher training. And also, if you have got a school that does not have adequate resources in the classroom, what you find is a situation where even good teachers are demotivated because they don't have the relevant and adequate facilities to be able to teach. And children also get demotivated from education and they drop out because of these reasons, because there's no adequate infrastructure. And we agree with that. This is a problem nationwide. That's what I was saying. I was not saying that the Western Cape is isolated with problems. I was trying to demystify this whole theory that the Western Cape is the best thing that is happening to South Africa, and there's nothing else that is happening here besides what's happening in the Western Cape. By the way, the matric last year, the matric student who did best was coming from a rural school in Gauteng, not in the Western Cape. The student that did best in the Western Cape was coming from a semi-private school in the Western Cape. Now, so that is the reality of the inequalities in our system. So what we are saying is that let us improve teacher training, let us improve, we've provided workbooks for 6 million students, regardless of whether they are rich or poor, come from rich backgrounds or poor backgrounds. Workbooks from students in grade 1 up until grade 6. And I want to extend it to even students in high school. Give a workbook to every student so that they are able to interact with have learning material. Grade 1 students don't have learning material in the past. They just went, when I was in grade 1, I only had the 2 choir book, actually a 72-page exercise that I used. Today, our children have workbooks. They're able to interface, and it's an exciting moment for South Africa when our children have something that they go back home with. The problem is, the benefits that we have. I come from a family that is relatively well off compared to my fellow brothers and sisters. I had an opportunity when my mother was a teacher. She would be able to assist me with my homework. The challenge we have in South Africa is that when our kids from poor schools go back home, they can't be able to get assistance. They don't have aftercare facilities, which is something that we want to introduce in our community, and I'm sure that Jay will agree with us. Let's introduce aftercare facilities. We do have churches in our communities. Young people who are there working, who are there participating, who are educated, they are there in our communities, can assist to help young people with their homework, to help young people to interact with their schoolwork, even beyond classroom, so that they are not in class. That is what we want to say.
So just to take you back to the earlier part of the question, is our matric at the right level? Is it not too easy? Do you think it's a valuable certificate?
Look, we think that our matric should not be viewed in isolation. We need to look at our education system as a whole. The problem in South Africa is that we have this a lot of obsession about matric. We need to look at our schooling system as a whole, which then produces matric. Because matric mainly is actually a lot of work that has been done in previous grades. So what we need to say, that is what the problem in South Africa is, that we have changed our education system a lot. Because we're trying to get the best model. The reality is that you won't get necessarily the perfect model in education. We're not saying this is the perfect model, this CAP system that is there, but we're saying the good thing about it is that it now focuses more on maths and literacy. So it will assist our students to be able to deal with the mathematics, to assist our students to be able to read and write. That is what is important to our system. So we're confident about our system, but we are open to improving it and making sure that we ensure that young people get the best quality education.
Thank you. Mbali, I just want to remind you of the two parts of the question. The first was that, is the South African matric at the right level? And the second part of the question is, you've already mentioned that you have a problem with the quality of our teachers and their subject knowledge. You said you wanted to give incentives. Perhaps you could expand upon that point a little. Thank you.
Sure. Oliver, good question. And the fact of the matter is, Ben Zimander's comment is indefensible. And I'm happy to go on record saying that he's probably the worst minister that we've had when it's come to education in this regard, because he's been woefully days I fear when it's come to actually needing to intervene and make the right calls when it comes to our education. So I don't really care about all the stats that have been thrown around here. The fact of the matter is, it is never good in a country to say that somebody having 10% is a good enough pass rate for them. And I like that my colleagues touched on EPTs, because it's all very well to say that people must now have their 30% and go and get vocational training. What we as Democratic Alliance say is that people should have a choice. So let's have good enough education so that somebody can actually pass with a decent pass rate, and then decide that if they want to go to an EPT college, if they want to get vocational training, that's something that's open to them. But should they wish to go to tertiary institutions to get, the more theoretical academic ability to study, then that should be something that they have. Not that they're forced now into being in a vocation that they don't want to be because all they've got is 30%, because our ministers weren't able to do the adequate planning that would have been able to help them to actually get to that level. When it comes to the teaching, as I said, and the promotion incentives that we would provide, we first of all professionalize teaching, and we've already had a campaign as a DA to say that we need to, have teachers. In America, they have something called Fulbright, where they have a scholarship where they get young people who want to be teachers to be able to do their teaching, to go across the world, do different things. Yeah, okay, thanks. In the Democratic Alliance, we would do that. We would professionalize teaching by having a minimum standards that you'd have to actually qualify and to be able to use to be a teacher anywhere in the country. We'd have competency testing, so we can make sure that our teachers actually know what they were teaching people. And promote things like short-term contracts, where you get young people who are, needing the skills to become teachers, to have maybe 2-year contracts, so that we could fill in these places that have been so many gaps, be it maths, be it literacy, be it the arts, and really get our teachers into the classroom that way. And then coupled with what I said before about having regular testing, regular management, and making sure that schools that have teachers that are good will be able to be incentivized, and schools that have teachers that are bad will be able to be helped to make sure that we're actually getting our kids to be able to get quality education. But just going back to the point you raised, I don't think it's conscionable that we can have a minister that can be happy to say that that's something that we should be able to live with. And that's not a problem necessarily for all young people in South Africa, because some of them do get really good with their education. But I think the basics here is that if one person's left behind, if one person isn't able to access the kind of opportunity that they want to fulfill their dream because of the bad education system, then we'll all be left behind. And no amount of rhetoric or spin or saying that, we want to do things that it's okay from the ANC is going to solve that or is going to make it okay. It is wrong, and we should be making sure that our government is incentivizing the right kind of things to happen from the very beginning of the school and education system to allow our young people to be able to do whatever they want to fulfill their dreams.
Denny, I'm going to swing it back to you. You kind of set us off on this line of questioning. You said there's a big image problem here, that people are being constantly told matric at Wordsworth, and that demotivates our matrics. If we change that attitude, do you feel that the document is worth something? People who are educated in your community, do they come out educated? Are they functioning members of society able to do work if they can get their attitude right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just I agree with the few points ANC has said. And the ANC has a lot of good ideas. But the only problem is they just can't divorce those ideas from the really bad leadership that is supposed to be implementing those ideas. That is that bad. And and I'm going to go back to my small community. That's where I'm really active and involved with the schools and with a lot of teachers. We are lucky we have the head of education, the Miss Ntego, who's really passionate about education. And from our politicians, we can't get any support. So the problem is the ANC will sit here, brilliant ideas, and I agree with most of them, and we just can't divorce them from the really bad leadership. We have people who sit there and literally can't implement these good ideas, which should be helping our people.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a very brief break there just to get some more water for the delegates, and then we'll carry on from there. Just 1 minute.
Okay.
Right, welcome back. We do have an apology from the delegate from the EFF. There was a big function in KwaZulu-Natal today. Julius Malema was there himself. They're having a big meeting and a big debriefing. He really did hope to join us, and it's because of that he's not able to join us. So we thank him for that apology. We do need to be a little bit conscious of time. I love these things, but these boys have been picked up in just over an hour. A very quick question from me, and then we'll move on to a bunch more questions from the boys. I want to talk about Clifton. This is obviously a private school. We're very aware of how privileged we are to be here. What is your party's view? This was a question we were obviously hoping for perhaps quite a different answer from the EFF, but I'd be interested to hear what the delegates have to say here. I'm actually going to start with you, Mundeni, coming from your community and then coming to a school like this. What do you reckon? Should we have private education in South Africa? Are you happy with the status quo, or would you change things if you could?
With concern to private education, I wouldn't change much. In fact, I would try and make it more accessible to more people, maybe a bit cheaper, and privatize more schools, and take it away from the people that are quite clearly favored to manage those schools. If we almost privatize education, that will ensure that the really bad schools, the fly-by-night schools, will get dropped the fine, and the really good schools will stay on, and they could open a second branch, a third branch, almost running like a business, I think.
Thank you. Mbali, the Democratic Alliance, what private education in a developing nation? What's your standpoint?
Look, I think that nobody would fault having any school that delivers policy outcomes like we see with private schools. So as a Democratic Alliance, we think that private schools should have a place in the rural society in South Africa. And I think what we also need to do is maybe look at extending into some models like charter schools that you have in America, for example, which would basically operate in the same way, would actually give more scope to those private schools and the management of the schools. And then we can start looking at putting different streams of schools. And part of our education offers having schools that also are in some ways vocational in some aspects. Schools that also cater for people that want to perhaps pursue professional sporting achievements for when they go out schools. So I think that there's a good space for private education in South Africa. I think that it's a model that's working well, and I think that it's a model that is achieving outcomes in terms of the people that we see graduating from them. And we really want to encourage excellence in South Africa, and that's why I think that, there's no fault that you can find that. But just to continue about the promotion of different types of independent schools. I think that we have this demonizing of private schools in South Africa because it seems as though it's an elitist area where people can't access. And I think, part of what Dean is saying, we should be encouraging private schools to take on students if they can, but also allowing those students to be able to actually come to the schools and then helping those students or helping those schools maintain their level of academic excellence by supporting them and by giving them more money, I think. Because I think right now a lot of private schools are run just on the fees that they get, but I think the government should be promoting and incentivizing schools like Clifton to get bigger if possible, get better facilities if possible, by also helping them out in that case. And I think that's where you can also start absorbing a lot more young people that are in schools that aren't as good, but actually have the academic talents to compete and be with the students on Clifton.
And do we leave fees up to the market?
I think that's fair. I think that as part of our market economics offer to South Africa, that would be the best way to do it, because you also want to give people a choice. You don't want to push people out because they aren't a certain income. So Clifton is one price and Clifton's another price. And students should choose where they want to go. They work private schools, and as long as they work, have academic excellence and performance outcomes that are on the stature that they need to be, then it's absolutely fine.
What's the ANC view on private
Well,
schools?
firstly, let me just say it was easy for Mari to answer the last question because the EFF is in chair. The issue of leaving to the market. I may get a bit into trouble in this question with the ANC, because the ANC is a little bit more conservative than us as young cadres within the ANC. We're much more radical about these questions. Look, I would love to have more Cliftons in Kwamashu, in Gugule, to Soweto. I really do. Want to have, this is the type of schools that we need to have. We need to have these schools as resources as this. But the question is it sustainable in a South Africa? And shoot me for this, but I'll go back to our historic context. With this historic context that economic opportunity is racialized. And therefore, inherently, if we have a system of two education systems, a private and a public education system, you will reproduce the consequences that we all here don't want to have about it, of having one racial group be, much more, people receiving better education than the other. Because the reality is that South Africa's socio-economic question is racialized. And that's the reality. We know that they are, by the way, children of the leaders of the ANC. We always tell them, children of Ramaphosa and others, who go to these affluent schools. But the problem is that we are going to produce a white elite and a black elite in South Africa. It's unsustainable because only a few will benefit. And then we are going to have the vast majority continuing in, getting poor quality education. And you know what's the unintended consequence? Is that one day these many who don't get quality education are going to rise against the few elites in South Africa. So whether that's sustainable for all of us, I don't think that's where we want to go. So I want to say we do need a private education system right now in South Africa because we need to expand access opportunities. That's my only argument why we need it, because we can't close down private schools because we really do need more students in our school system. But I believe certainly we need to phase out in time private education and decommodify education in South Africa. We can't leave education to be determined by the markets because we are going to reproduce an elite in society, and we are not going to deal with the socio-economic question in South Africa, which says the likelihood of a child born in Mitchell's Plain compared to a child born in Umhlanga is that you are going to have that current child unable to become a CEO of ABSA. But a student coming from Clifton is definitely going to have an opportunity to become a CEO of a company. So that's the reality in South Africa. If we don't deal with that socio-economic question, we're in trouble. We may be fine today and be comfortable today. Even the ANC leadership is comfortable. We tell them every day because their children are not going to the public schools. And that's an issue that we always raise with them because they're comfortable now. But the reality is that this is a ticking time bomb. And it's going to really do us bad. Because we already have people on 4 million sitting at home doing nothing.
Mbali, a very quick response. Is this a bad road we're heading down?
Just to answer on the socio-economic issue, the way that you address the socio-economic issue is not to try and prescribe what the outcome is going to be, like my colleague is choosing, but rather to say how we actually open up the access so that more people are able to actually access the kind of education that we have in Clifton. Which is why when I was speaking, I was talking about making sure that we are able to roll this out to more students, that actually making and taking what private schools do best, which is a commodity in terms of education, and making it accessible to more young students by government actually helping them in that regard, and also pioneering different types of education models. You don't say because some people aren't going to be able to get there, that everyone must not be able to get there, because then you actually are going to do exactly what you're scared of doing, is taking the country backwards in terms of the quality, the excellence that we would be able to produce. What you want to do is get more people into that system, rather than saying because that system right now is only able to access a few people, you take it out completely. The problem, what we need to do is open that access, make sure that private schools are able to be replicated in terms of the management and the things that they do right into other places. That's how you'll get 2.4 million, not in a single country, because we'll actually be getting the same quality of education. So you don't try and say what you want the outcome to be before you even started in terms of how people are actually going to be able to access that.
Can I just say one point? We're not talking about a pull down system. We're not saying that let's take away the quality that is offered in our private schools. We are saying in time, that's what I'm talking about, a phasing approach. In time, we need to elevate our schools to a level that is producing quality.
Then we agree.
And once we do that, where we disagree about it, once we have been able to do that, I don't believe there is a necessity for us to have education as a commodity. Education is a fundamental right enshrined in the constitution of the country. Every child has a right, not just to education, every child has a right to quality education. By the way, if children from Kamash can go to the constitutional court and take our government to the constitutional court because they're not receiving quality education, they will win the case in the constitutional court. Then they don't have money to do it.
Yeah.
That's the reality. So we need to be able to do that. Now, we can't leave the left one issue. We can't leave the price of education to the markets. The universities, the reason why we have got so many strikes, and I'm probably going to get to this question, so many strikes in the universities, is because universities are increasing fees beyond inflation, making it more and more difficult for the poor and the working class parent to afford education. And once you do that, if you allow it to the markets, the reality is that you're going to exclude many, because the reality of the market is that it's exclusionary. And the market, by the way, in 2008 collapsed. So it's capitalism is not the most perfect system. Unfortunately, the AFF is not there to advocate for the other system. But
so I'm really need to move forward. I'm going to stay within the topic area and let you pick up on what you've been saying, because I want to look at the same issue, but perhaps from the other side of the spectrum. I think the Clifton boys also hearing capitalism and markets are waiting for me to go off, and they're getting worried about that. Sean Quiller, if you prepare yourself, please. South Africa also, as well as private schools, has introduced non-fee paying schools. And most of the parties wish to extend this program. Once again, the EFF, who are not here, want that applied to all education in South Africa as a basic right. You also mentioned that basic right to education. Is this the answer? How far should we extend this program? And can we afford it? Sean, what's your question, please?
So, if you intend to increase the percentage of non-fee paying schools, please explain how that will be financially feasible. And how are you going to ensure that the schools are well maintained, that the textbooks are delivered on time, and so on?
Mr. Martin, what you can pick up and carry on with that.
Well, we've got already about 9 million young people, 7 million young people benefiting from no-fee schools. We increased that from 2009, it was about 5 million to 7 million now. And we have been able to ensure that we sustain those schools. There are challenges, yes. But the reality is that education in South Africa must be a societal issue. Let me go back to this issue. The private sector in South Africa is not contributing enough to education in South Africa. We need to get the private sector to play a role. And government has been calling on the private sector. Political parties have been calling on the private sector. I think now we need to really exert a much more stronger hand on private capital to invest more in education. Because the reality is that you as a student right here, when you are produced by these schools and our universities, you are going to go and work for the private sector. So they need us. So they must also play a role. So I believe that we need to really have introduced education tax in South Africa. I heard that DA is now supporting us on free education. I welcome that. But the reality is that how do you fund free education? We need to fund it by having an education tax. The reality is that private companies in South Africa, this is a story that the media does not tell us, is sitting with close to about R1 trillion in uninvested profits. If we were to take a percentage of that and give it to education to be able to fund public education in South Africa, we can't be able to have more of these quality outcomes that we're looking for. So I'm saying the private sector must play a role. We must tax more business in South Africa. We must ensure that we put capital controls, that most businesses in South Africa have this thing of being double listed. They take out profits in South Africa to other countries, to Australia, to the United Kingdom, and to the United States of America. We need to keep those profits in South Africa to really fund education as a priority for the whole country.
Umneni, do you agree? Is it the role of business? Should be the role of government? Do you have non-fee paying schools in America?
I agree there. I mean, if the private sector wants an educated workforce, what's stopping you from getting involved? There's absolutely nothing stopping you, because you are going to benefit from an educated workforce that's coming through the system. So absolutely.
Bali, is this practical? What's the DA's position?
So, in the Western Cape, we've expanded no-fee schools, and we believe that with the quintile system, which really says that schools that are poorer should be able to get more government funding, we agree with that. We put 65 million to getting money into 200 schools. I agree with my colleague that we need to have a far bigger investment from our private sector. But the question then is, as the ANC, which is embedded with the private sector in the country, despite what they say about capitalism, why haven't they been calling on this, and why hasn't it been something that's been done? And the fact of the matter is, this would be very easy to actually finance if we had adequate planning, and if we didn't have politicians that constantly had their hands in the cookie jar. That also comes into what we say when we talk about NSFAS and free education at a tertiary level. Those things are very able to happen. 16 billion is a drop in the ocean of making sure that every qualifying matric student would be able to get to university. But if we constantly have people stealing our money and the Auditor General saying that we have 30 billion of regular expenditure that nobody knows where it goes, then we're not going to be able to actually fund these things. But we don't have a problem with people being able to have no-fee schools, because we do need to ensure that all young South Africans are able to access quality education. And the reality is not everyone can actually afford to pay. So I think we're all in agreement on this panel that we need that, and that it's a system that is actually working, and that what we need to do is make sure that we can put more money into it, to making sure that those no-fee schools are of the same quality, which currently there aren't always.
Right, from a point of agreement, let's get just a little bit dangerous. We've mentioned corruption. We're not going to get through the evening without talking about it a little bit. There's Navan here to ask his question, please. Thank you very much. I will direct this to Mr. Mahamboti to start, and then go through again.
Good evening to the delegates. With regard to the textbook saga in the Popo, is this sort of incident an example of inefficiency or corrupt system? How does your party plan to prevent this situation from being repeated?
Yes.
Well, we agree. We're in agreement with the young man. It was a national embarrassment, the whole question of textbooks. The question of corruption in South Africa, and I want to go back to this whole issue, it's not the ANC that is corrupt. I think people need to understand this in context. The ANC is a microcosm of society. It is a mirror image in other English. It's a mirror image of society, basically. If it's the corruption that you see in the ANC, the corruption that is there in our communities. That is why he was talking about the people, probably who are not in the ANC, who are providing food to our kids, who are really not doing what they're supposed to do. We need to deal with the systemic issue that underpins cronyism in South Africa. And that is dealing with the socio-economic question in the country. That is dealing with the socio-economic system of the country. So yes, what we are going to do to ensure, we have ensured now, this year, after the textbook saga in Limpopo that year, what was it, 2011, we have improved textbook delivery in the country. But we're going beyond that. We're saying, what's the use of giving textbooks? We want to give, in our manifesto, we say we're going to give children tablets so that they've got textbooks on their tablets, they've got better teacher resources. So you don't have to have the system of privatizing textbook delivery, giving it to companies to provide. And that's a problem, that's a climate crisis. Also have to improve our own capacity within the state to do some of the things that we do privatize and give to the private sector. Because central to the question of textbooks in the book was the whole question around the company that was involved, the private sector, which was not really, what was putting profits before the national interest, which is education, which is our children. And that is a crisis that we have in South Africa because everybody, because of the fact that, and by the way, it's not true that the ANC is in bed with the private sector, it's probably the DA which is in bed with the private sector, because the private sector in the main in South Africa remains untransformed. And they have been able to contain resources amongst a few, and unfortunately I have to say, a few white elites in South Africa. And the reality is that then the other masses in South Africa want to scramble for this small piece of the cake. And that's a crisis. That's a crisis. That really reproduces the greed that is there, because everybody wants to run for these scarce resources that are there. So I think that's we need to deal with it much more systematically. But going forward, we have been able to deliver textbooks satisfactorily. In fact, we have been able to deliver 100% of our textbooks in most of the provinces. And there are challenges there and there. And the whole issue is how schools really do give feedback to government, and the whole bureaucratic nature in which government does this thing. So when we introduce tablets, we believe we have been able to deal with this issue once and for all. We don't need textbooks. We need our kids to be able to have adequate teaching and learning resources. That's why I want to give them tablets over the next 5 years.
Why are you shaking your head? Why are you shaking your head?
Because everything my colleague has said is just a fallacy, and it's funny. The fact of the matter is, the ANC is corrupt, and whether you decide that's individuals or the party, the fact of the matter is, individuals that are in your party that you have mandated to make sure that textbooks arrive on time, we're not able to do so because they're found to have been having a corrupt relationship with those very private sector people that you want to take out. So it's not about the private sector, it's about the corruption and the corrupt nature that the ANC governments that have been given the mandates and the power to make these deals happen actually corrupt people. And I don't really care about whether a private person decided to not deliver the books. The fact of the matter is, it is your job as a government to make sure that those books are delivered. And if you can't do it because you're having corrupt tendencies with them, then that means that your government and the people that you employ are corrupt. So let's not run away from that, first of all. Secondly, the DA has already established a system of being able to give tablets to students. So well done for getting on board with that. And the fact of the matter is that everywhere where we govern in the Western Cape, we were able to give textbooks to every single school, every single learner, on time, every single year, unlike the ANC. And if you're saying that you have problems here and there, we're very happy to take over the government and show you how it should be done. Then the other thing that you talk about is the fact that, sometimes books come, sometimes books don't come. Again, I don't understand how you can run away from that, because whereas whether or not it's a problem that happens, it's the fact that your ANC government's not able to deliver them. And you haven't delivered them 100% since 2010, because just this year, the DA uncovered a warehouse where books were stacked and still weren't being delivered, and then some of them were being thrown in the river. So it's a complete lie to say that you've been able to do that when we know, and I was there, and we found those books, the students are still sitting in the purple classrooms without those textbooks. As for us in the Western Cape, as I said, we've been able to do that, and we've been able to do it because when we give those government tenders, when we get suppliers to do that, we have an open process where everyone can come and tender for the books, and then we make sure that we get the right people and we hold them to account. And if they don't do it, then obviously there are repercussions, which we never see from the ANC, no matter how much their people might screw up. We never see or hear that somebody is being fired or that somebody is being held accountable. And that's the difference about how we would be able to make sure that we were able to get the books out to them.
That's the story of the southern suburbs in Cape Town. It's not the story of the people who are really having challenges in the rural areas.
Yeah, no, back to that up, because you're the ones who made that report that says that we've been able to do that, and we can back it up with showing in our schools that this has happened. Whereas in the ANC, as you say, not even all provinces you're able to do that. So
we're not going to do it in certain provinces.
We deliver things on time. You do not.
We've reached an impasse here, so I'm going to take the discussion forward again. The audience wasn't following the basis. Is there corruption in the private sector or in the government, or both? We're not going to agree. Lenny, I'm going to ask you to take us forward, perhaps by talking about your own experience. Do your teachers in your community come to work every day?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say, if anybody is going to stand up in front of an educated, literal audience and claim that the ANC is not corrupt, that statement needs to be followed by an apology. And an apology to our people, because the corruption is quite scary. It was Khalima Mashanta in 2007 who said that corruption is eating away at the ANC. And it is true. And we said from top to bottom, because number one, we can't divorce corruption away from number one and number two. Whenever people think of number one and number two, they think of Nkandla and Marikana, and that's all you can think of. So and all the way to the bottom to a mayor's wife that I know personally that sold ID books to foreigners and still kept the job and is still working today. Nothing was done. It was on the front page of a newspaper with my name on the bottom. Not one ANC official even bothered to question it. Nothing was done. She still works and I still smile at her. She's the person. But corruption is scary and it is destroying our education system. And also I want to add is that I agree with you on one thing, is that the Upper State government did provide a really good story for white people. That is true. What the ANC government is doing is providing a good story for who, I would like to ask you. Which racial group is it providing a good story for? Which class of people is it providing a good story for, if any?
A very quick response, and I really would like to move out here. Yeah. Quick response.
No, we want to provide a better South Africa for all South Africans. Because when we said, when we adopted the Freedom Charter in 1955, we said South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white. And our focus, the focus of our policies, is to ensure that we elevate the working class and the poor. And that's a sensible thing to do, regardless of their race. Let us uplift the working class and poor. And let me just say this on the question of inequality. I do not say the ANC is not corrupt, or there is no corruption in the ANC. I said the ANC as an organization is not corrupt, but there is corruption in the ANC, which is a mirror image. I even use the word, it's a microcosm of the corruption that is in the society, the ills that we have in society. So it is an admission that we in the ANC, it's correct to point out to country, even when I mentioned the past conference, exposes this corruption that we have within our structures and within government, and we want to deal with it.
Thank you. As I said, I'm not considering this issue closed. We're not going to find agreement, so let's move on. Carl, if you could get your question ready, please. I'm going to bring this to a personal issue. We've been reading a lot of education statistics to prepare for this evening. I would apologize on behalf of the teachers of South Africa, because it looks like we're not doing a very good job. I'm terribly dismayed to see that statistics show that teachers lie at the heart of most of our problems. There are a number of studies which isolate teachers as the problem in South Africa. The terrible problem is we seem to be qualified on paper, but we are not delivering a product in the classroom. Carl, that leads us to your question, please. I'm afraid I've lost the thread, so I'll just start with the body, please, and then we'll carry on again.
Good evening. How do you plan to curb teacher absenteeism?
That's no question.
It's a short, simple question, but a very big issue.
I think again, Carl, it comes to management and making sure that we are actually holding our teachers to account and the principals to account. And making sure that the grip that the unions have on our teaching force really is one that needs to be really looked at. And unfortunately, because the unions are in bed with the ANC, it's really hard for other parties to really have a good conversation with them where they might govern, for example, to make sure that teachers stay in school when they should be there. But I think really we just need to really crack the whip and say that if teachers are not going to be in the classrooms when they should be, and aren't going to help our students perform to the ability they should be, then they need to go, because they've clearly made the choice that something else is more important than what they're calling as apparently and what they should be doing and what they're getting paid for. So in the DA, where we govern, we make sure that we have performance assessments that are done regularly, that we are checking that our teachers are in school, so we're checking that also in the outcomes based on how students are doing, and then we're checking that the teachers that are actually employed are qualified and are constantly being tested to make sure they are competent teachers.
If I could just interrupt you, who would do that? Is that the government or the government body or an independent body? Who would do that checking on the teachers?
Well, we do that in collaboration with those forces. So it is the governing body, it is the school principals, and it is the district managers of those particular areas. Because that's the best way, because you want to have somebody from each of the stakeholder positions be able to actually talk about that. But the fact of the matter is, people must do their jobs. And too often in this country, people get away with not doing their jobs because they're connected or because they're protected by big unions that are able to throw their weights around because the ANC doesn't have the balls, basically, to make sure that they stay in school.
Umdeni, do teachers in your community go to work every day? Is this a problem for you?
I can just make a suggestion. This is one, while I was a little boy, and we used to call them abasholi, and they used to come through to schools. And I don't know what happens to these abasholi. We don't have them anymore. We've just been lost back. And and the teacher is teaching on Zoom, so you would come in and check the post to see if the teacher is really teaching, to check up on the standards. So we just bring back about 30 in our schools.
Moving back to inspectors, is that the way forward? How is the ANC going to make sure teachers stay at work?
So we agree with this whole issue of getting the government, getting the businesses, to ensure that our schools are there. But we believe that our ethos that drives our education policy is people's education for people's power. And that's why every time I've been emphasizing the point that says we need the community involved. If you look deeply to where these teachers are going to schools, it's in our township schools and our rural schools. These are the schools which don't have adequate resources. And I raised this issue earlier that teachers who come to classrooms that don't have the adequate teacher training facilities, even the best of teachers, even the best teachers that you can find in South Africa, you go to a class, you find that there's no chalk. You go to a class, you find that there's no board you can write on. These are things that also demotivate our teachers. And that's another systemic issue that we really need to deal with. It's all well and good to say we're going to fire and hire teachers. That's a simple solution. That's putting a plus on the roof. We think we need to deal with the more systemic issues. The issue around resourcing our schools, the issue around ensuring that teachers understand that education, being an educator, is not just about getting a salary, but it's also about contributing to the country. The sense of patriotism. It is sad that in certain schools, some teachers, for example, we had to intervene in the Walter Sisulu University, where lecturers decided not to go to work for 6 weeks. And we, about almost 8 weeks, we had to say, as a student leadership at the time, this is not correct. Because the reality is that this is a university that takes up the poorest of the poor of our children. So when you don't come to class, our teachers need to understand that they are condemning those students to poverty, to unemployment, and to inequality in our society. So they need to take responsibility. But we are also saying that the issue of management, we agree with money. We are saying principals, for instance. Principals, we support teacher unions. We support teacher unions. Teachers must be protected, they are workers. But principals must not, we don't think principals must be part of unions. They are managers. Their responsibility must be to manage the school and ensure that teaching and learning happens in the schools. That is an important issue. The other problem, by the way, that we were discussing in the last National Conference of the ANC quite critically, is the fact that school governing bodies have the power to appoint teachers. What is happening in our rural schools is that you find school governing bodies no longer doing their oversight work, but becoming employment agencies, where there's squabbles and fights in the community. Now, we are going to say teacher SGBs are ANC, right? But SGBs in the main in our communities, the parents, sitting there fighting in our rural schools, happening there, sitting there fighting really about which teacher to employ, which person must go and assent to be a principal. And these things collapse our schools. So we really need to deal with those issues in our schools. I think it's very important.
Bali, I saw you jumping at a couple of those points.
Just a two thing on the points. I'm glad that, I think we all support that people should be able to protect by unions, and I'm glad that my colleagues raised that. But the fact of the matter is we never hear our unions saying that they're going on the streets to fight for better resources or better access or better facilities. All we ever hear is that they want bigger salaries, or they are striking because of some other union doing something and they needed to come in and fill in the numbers. So if the ANC is really serious about education, then it needs to have an honest conversation with SAFTU about why every time they strike, it's always about things to do with the teachers and teachers' benefits and teachers' salaries, and never about wondering about what those kids are actually going to get, because that's not what we hear from SAFTU either. So it's all very well to say that people should be able to strike, but if they're not striking for the right reasons, such as making sure that students that they're meant to be teaching are the ones that are accessing those opportunities, then frankly it's actually quite selfish. And as for Baines, Amanda, and what's this too, we were all there, we were all outraged. But again, nobody's done anything about the fact that those lecturers went in that university for 8 weeks and that the government dragged its feet before making sure that people who now were disadvantaged in their final years of studies were able to get something. So again, it's just going around in circles because you say the right things, but you don't do anything about it. So if you wanted to make sure that they were doing something, you should have called them to office and make sure that he was able to account for that, as the DA did at the time, as we continue to do about that crisis that happened there.
1 minute for a bounce back.
Yes, I think the problem with universities in South Africa, and the DA has been protecting the universities, they have this thing called institutional autonomy. They say, the policy says, the current policy framework in South Africa says the university has got autonomy. They run their own business. So it's very difficult for us to always point the finger at government and pointing the finger at the university. But for WUSU, for instance, is a university under administration. And we take responsibility for it. But the issue around teacher unions, we are currently reviewing remuneration of teachers right now, because that has been at the center of the disputes between the Department of Basic Education and teacher unions about the OSD, about certain issues that relate to remuneration. And that is what we need to deal with. We need to really assess and say how much our teachers work and really deal with this issue. We can't have a problem where teachers are not paid adequately and therefore they are forced to go and strike, or they work in conditions that are not enabling them to work because they are workers at the end of the day. So we need to take responsibility as the community also to look after our schools. And the community are the ones who produce these teachers.
Thank you. We will come back to universities for our last question, basically. It does seem we're on a point of agreement. It's just about getting all the role players to do what they're supposed to be doing and not stand in the way. Question 5, if Saif can prepare himself, please. Another terrible statistic, I was talking about all the reports that we've been reading through, government reports and other reports, shows a staggering dropout rate between grade 9 and matric. In certain quintiles, that's over 50%. Quintiles are basically earning brackets. If you don't know what we're talking about, it's been mentioned before. Definitely this has the biggest impact on black learners. It's almost a discussion in itself. It's been the whole evening on this, but let's try and focus it in. Saif, what's your question, please?
Given that there are numerous reasons for the high percentage of students that drop out of schools from the grades 9 to 12, such as having to leave school to find work, to support their family financially, does your party intend to provide incentives for such impoverished learners to remain in school?
Mr. you want to start with that, please?
Well, we've really begun to ensure that we have the school nutrition scheme, and that we want to extend to all learners from poor schools, not only in primary schools, but also in high schools. But the issue of dropout rates, you have mentioned it, the challenges that cause it, and we really need to deal with the whole transition also. Not only, I spoke about earlier about the transition from foundation level, grade 1 to 3, to intermediate level, grade 4 to grade 7. The transition from primary school to high school. Are these learners prepared enough to be able to go there? And they get frustrated. The other issues related to the two streams, and I heard everybody speak to this issue earlier, about ensuring that we allow our children, that's what the ANC manifesto is saying, to have two streams. If you want to go the academic route, you're allowed to go the academic route. If you want to go the vocational route, you're allowed to go the vocational route whilst you're still in high school. We're not saying let's wait up until you finish matric, but you must have an option. I went to a technical high school, for instance, but we're saying we want to have that option in all our schools where students can really choose which options to go to. But we need to deal with the other issues that cause it. It's gangsterism. Our communities are not safe. And the communities around our schools, the environment there, is really, really disappointing, as was put by the gentleman sitting here on my left. I hope he's also left. We need to deal with the whole question of the community as a whole. How does it ensure? In the past, when we did have apartheid, yes, but our people did not sit back and say children must not go to school because we're fighting this system that was named the crime against humanity. Every parent, whether it's your child or it's not your child, when you see a child who is not at school during school time, you would ensure that you take that child to the nearest school and ensure. So we need to get society to really play a role in this. But the question of dropouts also relates, as you're putting it, to the socio-economic questions in our society. If we don't deal with the socio-economic question, if we don't transform the ownership of the economy, the ownership and control of the economy, if we don't create job opportunities, we are going to have students who are burdened with the fact that at home there's no food to eat. Even though I'm getting food at school, but at home I don't know what's going to happen. And this is reality, for instance, with students who are in universities, who are getting the NSFAS scheme, but they're using the money they get from the NSFAS scheme to take money back home to feed their families. And that is the whole underlying issue, which is a socio-economic question, which we really need to deal with in South Africa and transform our economy. And this is going to bear some fruits in terms of this issue of dropouts of students and getting more students in class. Focusing, a learner must not be concerned about the socio-economic conditions at home. A learner must focus about getting educated and going and making something out of themselves.
There were very, very few good things that were about apartheid, but apparently truant officers, those are those guys who would make sure people were in school, and that was one of them, and maybe we should have them back. And then, what do you want to hear? What is needed in your community to keep children in schools?
As you said, I mean, we asked about incentives. I mean, the government already has a system that says we should feed a child at school. The system is there. The problem, the disconnect is that it doesn't actually happen at schools. That's where the disconnect is. Brilliant ideas from the top, disconnect at the bottom. That is the problem. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these dropouts.
Molly, you were nodding your head. You obviously some points of agreement. Explain those and where you might disagree.
Well, I think everybody knows that there's a huge socioeconomic factor that comes into somebody being able to continue in school, stay in school. If they don't have the right stability at home in terms of that, then it is going to be far more difficult for them to be able to stay in school. But that doesn't, and that shouldn't be the problem of the learner or the students. That should be the problem of our government being able to make sure that we have an economic system that is actually going to allow growth, so that we have people actually getting jobs, their parents getting jobs, so the children don't have to worry about that. So that's very difficult to ask the schooling system to really solve, because it's not really a schooling system problem. That's a problem of the economy and of our government's inability to grow it at a rate that more people can be employed and be able to send their kids to school and not have them drop out. But when it comes to the actual dropouts, I think what we need to do, and what the Democratic Alliance says in terms of incentive, is we need to say to our young people, stay in school, and what we're offering is an opportunity voucher that you can use once you matriculate. So if you can't afford necessarily to be able to get into a tertiary institution, what we'd like to do with this opportunity voucher is use it to help you to either start a small business, to use it to help you to have some form of further education, give an FET or somewhere where you can actually afford to do it, because obviously you can't cover everything, or to use it to be surety for a bank to be able to give you a micro loan to be able to do something in your community and really start maybe creating entrepreneurs in that sense. Because once you're out of school, you should be able to have some sort of skills. And this goes back to the vocational stream, which is what we as DA would introduce, which would allow people that wanted to within high school, within basic education, to be able to have the skills to do something when they go out of university, out of high school. Because a lot of us are sitting here, and a lot of you guys are sitting here, and you're going to be very good in the academic stream, but if you haven't had a vocational stream, you're not going to be able to do something vocational unless you go to vocational technical college. We'd like to introduce it at school level, so once you matriculate, you're actually able to start and do something if that's what you want to do. And our opportunity voucher would help young people to be able to do that, and that's what we use to incentivize young kids to stay in school and not drop out, despite whatever socioeconomic background they might be coming from.
Thank you. Our last couple of questions. I will concede a point that's been raised earlier. Schooling is not all about matric, but it is something that a lot of people look at. We do look at matric statistics, so do overseas universities, where some of these gentlemen might want them to go. Ryan Fredericks, if you could prepare yourself, please. There are a lot of people who are very suspicious of the statistics that are released about our matric results. One of those particularly, if you compare grade 10, 11, grade 12. Ryan, if you would address your question, please, and we'll start with the ANC.
Good evening. Please comment on the alleged practice of culling at schools across the country.
Just to fill in for our audience who don't know what that means, it's a process by which principals in grade 10 or 11 will fail children out of school in that grade so they don't write matric and therefore don't affect the statistics. Is it fair? Is this happening or not? What's your response?
Well, we won't dispute the fact that these things are happening. Some only failing students, disencouraging students. We see this mainly in our black schools, from doing maths and science. You find the principal says there's not going to be a maths class. Everybody must just go and do maths literacy, because the principals are more concerned, and maybe we need to really look at this. Principals are more concerned about the bonuses that they receive when they have 100% pass rates, the incentive that they get if they've got higher pass rates in schools. And we really need to re-look at this question and say, how do we disincentivize principals from actually doing this? It's really killing our society, it is wrong, and it should be condemned with the contempt that it deserves. No principal should do that. For instance, I went to a public school, but I went to a much better public school, George Kelvin, for instance. I was told that I did all my subjects in high grade. I had to force to do maths in high grade. I was told that I'm not going to be allowed to do technical drawings in high grade. Because there was one class of technical drawings in Africa. When I went to the teacher said, well, you can do technical drawings, I think, but you won't have a teacher. And I had to be forced to actually register technical drawings and stuff like that. I find that to be absolutely wrong. It should not be allowed. Our students must be given enough opportunity to reach their full potential. And if the principals are doing this, we must condemn them. And that is also a consequence of the problems that we do face in our communities. Where are the school governing bodies when these things are happening? Where are student representative councils? There's another issue we've not spoken about. Students must also take responsibility and really look at what is the problems that are facing in the schools. And our communities must be involved. Our parents must be saying, we can't allow this. And principals are accountable to the school governing bodies. But the reality is that most of our school governing bodies are dysfunctional.
Bali, is there anything you want to add to that?
It's absolutely happening, Ryan. And in the Northwest and the Free State, which my colleague earlier cited as great examples, they actually have the most amount of students that have been culled. So in fact, their matric pass rates that were considered the best in the country actually weren't, because so many learners were culled out of the system before they could get there. And it's because of the obsession that we have about you just getting a matric pass rate, whereas it should be about quality education and making sure that students from grade 10 onwards are continuously monitored to make sure that they actually are the same ones that started that are going to finish. And so in the Western Cape, we've been able to keep the retention of our students by improving the education that we have, the teachers being in the classroom, and making sure that the students that actually start are also students that finish. And sometimes that means in pure numbers, we might not have the most, but at the very least, we aren't cutting students to make sure that we seem to have an inflated sense of matrics being able to pass. Unlike in other provinces where that is exactly what's happening, and unfortunately leaving a lot of young people out of the system, and frankly just dropping out before they're able to actually get into that will help them in the future. And it's sad, and it's something that we need to redirect in terms of how we look at the outcomes of education. It can't just be about you getting a 30%, it needs to be about you being able to do something with that 30%, preferably be able to get into another stream of education afterwards, be it FETs or tertiaries or universities.
Lenny, earlier you showed great disillusionment with a lot of leadership. Do you agree? Are principals the problem here? People being kicked out of school, not allowed to study?
It's not just the principals. I agree with both the guys that it shouldn't be happening. But maybe as a society, we're all too focused on numbers and statistics. And maybe we should be using a different thing. We should be using a different narrative to define what quality education is, rather than just a number. Because once you put a certain number that people have to achieve, people will go to the books to achieve that number. It happens in business, it happens everywhere. Maybe we should adopt a new narrative to define what quality education is, and not necessarily just a number.
Folks, it's getting towards the end of our evening. I'm going to move things along. One question from me, and then a last couple of questions from our audience about universities. A quick one, please. I'm a first language English speaker, very proud of my mother tongue, and I do speak numerous other African languages. But there's a lot of debate and a lot of people are worried as to what is the future of English in South Africa. It's a complex question, but I'm looking for quite a simple answer. Should English remain as the primary medium of instruction for our schools? And at what grade should it be introduced? Educational specialists are now saying grade 2. So should we keep English as the primary medium of instruction, and at what grade should we start that process? I think I'll start now with the DA. Mbali, what do you think?
As a Democratic Alliance, we take very seriously the constitutional provision for people to be able to use both in their mother tongue. And according to our research, the best way to do this would be to introduce it at a grade R curriculum and have students be able to continue on with 3 languages, of which English should be one of the languages just because of the nature of the world that we live in, as well as 2 other languages, one of course being preferably their mother tongue if they so choose. And then at grade 7 they'd be able to then continue to the stream that we currently have now, where they'd be able to take whatever language their school and where they decide to go to happen. But I think it's very important that we take into consideration that being taught in your mother tongue is likely to guarantee better success in being able to get the very basics of education right, which is why we advocate for it being a grade R level and thereon, rather than what's being tried to be introduced now, which is at the end of some of these schooling, which is very difficult once you've gone through the entire schooling process to now be taught in the mother tongue, and to have it at universities, that are advocating for it to be what's done in terms of the language transition. So, I mean, I think that this is something that we can all agree on, that people should be taught in their mother tongue until such time that they are able to choose that with their mother tongue plus another language that is recognized inside the Constitution, depending on the medium of instruction at that particular school that they choose to go to, should be what they are educated in.
Thank you. Cordelia, I don't know if I could ask you about your students' attitude. Do people want to learn English? Is it something they're scared of? How is it viewed by our communities in South Africa? Is it the language of the oppressor? Is it the language of science? How do people see English?
For me, I mean, I love Zulu. I'm Zulu, so I love it. I'm passionate about it. But then it doesn't mean that you should adopt a delusion in the face of reality. English is a great equalizer, in both in the private sector and everywhere else. I once had a debate with an EFF and a member in my local community who's not here. And he said that no, it should all be in Zulu right through and everything, and white people in fact must learn Zulu so I can go to work and speak Zulu. And it's fine. I said, okay, do me a favor. You translate the theory of gravity to Zulu and I'll personally teach it. And if you can't translate those certain concepts, then ask them to be only in English. And if you can't teach gravity without using the word gravity, then you shut up.
The children in your communities, do they want to learn English? That's another part of language. Yes,
yeah. Well, look, we disagree with you right now. I agree with you on that. We disagree because if you look at many other countries in the world who are successful, look at Germany, look at China, they've got very diverse societies. They've got people who are studying their own languages and they're successful. If you look at Afrikaans in South Africa, I always like to make this example, which is an African language. And Afrikaans have been able, and that's what the best thing that apartheid was able to achieve, African Empowerment, and elevating Afrikaans to be a language of commerce, a language of science. And by the way, many of these concepts we talk about are not even English concepts. They've been taken from different other languages. And we think that we really need to empower our African languages. We need to develop them. But really, the reality right now, how do we deal with the question of English being the medium of instruction today? The issue that we need to do, and we agree that students must be allowed to study their indigenous languages, But we have said, and we've already started, by the way, as an ANC government, that students at grade, the problem we said earlier is the transition from vernacular at grade 3 to English. It is really a big problem that we have. So we've already said English must be taught as a subject to students who are going to at grade 4 study in English, learning English as a language of teaching and learning. So we've already started to implement it, where in grade 1, in grade 2, in grade 3, students who are, for example, who are studying in a school in Wamashu, studying in Zulu in grade 1, but is also doing English as a subject to ease that burden on the students. So that's an intervention of really started doing, which is quite important. But we need to promote our African languages. Even our universities are starting to realize this, and we need to do that. And we need to look at this model that was used by the apartheid government to promote Afrikaans. And we need to really to invest more in promoting our African languages. Research shows that students who have studied in their language, in their indigenous language, are more likely to succeed in education, both in basic education and universities. And we think that it's going to really, be an expression of our diversity as a country that is promoted by our constitution. We think it's a very, very important thing. So our students do, by the way, I want to differ. In our communities, we are leading students. We lead students in universities. They do want to study their languages.
Thank you very much. There's a lot more we could say, but I'm very conscious of time, so if you don't mind, I'm going to move on. I'll ask two questions from the audience and then an opportunity for a closing statement from everybody out here. Waris, if you could prepare yourself, please. We've already mentioned disruptions. There's disruptions in school, there's disruptions at universities. These are our senior learners making up most of the crowd this evening, grade 11s and 12s for the most part. Some of them at the end of this year going to university. They've got some concerns. Maurice is going to voice one of them.
Well, in light of the recent student riots that I've only discussed but at UKZN and DUT, what we find is that there's a growing amount of student disobedience in universities. And in fact, 70% of those strikers essentially are first-year dropouts that are seeking to bully the universities into re-accepting them. And we find that they're largely succeeding in replacing fresh matriculants. So it could actually be me that is now taken out of the course owing to these strikers.
So I guess my question would be to the parties here, should there be more of a concerted effort to ensure that our university lectures aren't being disrupted or be essentially bullied by the students? What is your take on this issue?
I'm going to give the ruling part to the last one in the closing, so if you'd like to start with this question.
Okay. Guilty as charged. I'm the president of the South African Students' Congress that leads a number of these protests that we see in our universities. The issue is, it's not correct to say that people who are leading these protests are first-year dropouts. It is not the truth. Actually, university policies, very few university policies allow for first years to be excluded from this. We give first years, and we give a student about 3 semesters, which it's about to the second year in their first semester to really start to exclude a student who's not performing, just to deal with it. But the reality is that students in universities are facing serious challenges. If we can go to the residents, then the major issue is accommodation. Accommodation is a crisis in our university system. There has been a report that has been released by the Department of Higher Education and Training, which shows us that most of the residences and the conditions of these residences are dilapidated in our institutions of higher education. The other issue is the issue of funding. Universities are unfortunately increasing fees unreasonably. Secondly, the current funding model that is being reviewed of universities is skewed to benefit universities that are advanced because it works on research output. So I don't want to do that, we'll just complicate it for yourselves. But those are the main issues that are really faced, that students are really facing, and we need to deal with them. But the issue that we are raising, we can't have students who are protesting, vandalizing our properties in our universities. And we always say this to our members, and we do discipline our members. For instance, it happened in the University of Zurich a couple of years ago when our activists, our members, were taking responsibility for this, went and when they were protesting on genuine issues, the issues are genuine. They were protesting on genuine issues, they destroyed a library, they destroyed even a chapel where they go and pray. And we had to expel those people out of the South African Students' Congress. But if we don't, even if we can say we put rules and we expel the students, if we don't deal with the systemic issues that they are raising, the issues of adequate student housing, the issues of adequate teaching resources, we are not going to be able to deal with the whole question of violent student protest. And the reality is that we need to say to university student leadership and the universities, talk to each other, open the doors of communication, really deal with the questions that your institution is facing. But as a departing point, we should conclude. We believe that South Africans have seen the progress that we have made as the ANC government. We have been very honest with the challenges that South Africa faces because we understand that it's important for us to be critical, self-critical. Most of the criticism that happens about the African National Congress is actually exposed by the African National Congress itself. And we are saying that this is an organization, a vehicle for South Africans, which is already there, which has challenges. What is important is for South Africans to be part of this organization, to really ensure that we are within the ranks of the ANC, the educated, not sit outside of the ANC and say, well, the ANC is corrupt. You must be in the ANC, because the ANC is a true representation of South Africans. It is in every single one to influence, to change the ANC, to ensure that we become the leaders that we want to see in society. And I invite everybody to join us. And we want to say, we want to continue to increase access, but we really want to focus over the next 5 years on improving quality of our education. We must focus on improving quality. We want everybody to be involved. Opposition parties, we want the community to be involved in the project of taking education and making it a real societal issue. And we think that with those words, we want our South Africans, one body, even when they lose elections after the 7th of May, to come and partner with us to ensure that we go and expose principals who are inefficient, that we go and expose school governing bodies that are not doing the work. We must be on the ground in the communities by going hand in hand to ensure that we improve our education system. In the Western Cape, in Gauteng, and everywhere else. Thank you.
Now you've been called out, I'll let you respond, and also to respond to the question.
My colleague spoke for a long time, so I need to put on the question.
About rights at universities.
Right.
How do we stop that? How do we make sure that lectures carry on without disruption?
So the problem that we have at universities is that we have lots of students that go to them, but as my colleague has said, might only have funding maybe just for their tuition, but not for their accommodation, not for food. And so even if they're academically qualified some years, they might be excluded, or they might be excluded for a portion of those things, and so aren't able to actually get quality education, which is why we have some young students striking. Now, I don't think, again, that should be the problem of the students. If you worked hard and you're able to be at that university, you should be able to study there, get food there, get your books there. What we have is a system of NSFAS that is funded and modeled in an incorrect way. Because what we currently have is our government's taking the money and giving it to the universities, who then, again, because of a lot of corruption that we see happening and filtering into these institutions, decides in very ad hoc manner sometimes how to actually access and give those funding out. So what we would suggest as a Democratic Alliance, and I made this suggestion and I did a whole thing in 2010 to the Minister of Higher Education, is that that money should be going into the pockets of students who would best know what their needs were and how to actually make sure that they would be able to pay for what they needed and not use it for other things, and not have the university also take the money from them. Because then what you're able to do is have students who can fund their own education without having to wait for grants and bailouts from the university every single year. Obviously based on them being able to qualify academically and not just failing and continuing to be in the system and then taking you out of school. So the funding model that we have currently now is not sustainable. It also doesn't put enough money to make sure that all qualifying matrics are actually able to get that. This is where our offer of education and free education would come in, because we believe that every single student that's able to get into university should have access to that university. And that would be done if we have 16 billion of the fiscus being put into NSFAS. We've casted this as a Democratic Alliance. It's something that's possible, and it's something that we want, because it shouldn't be such a difficult situation that every single year our government is unable to plan for the amount of students that are getting paid into the university system. And so we have these strikes because more people are there than should be there. We should also be opening up more universities that can actually absorb these people, but until such time that we do, we should be able to be getting those students to be able to have that. The other wonderful thing about having the money in your pocket as a student as opposed to the university is that it gives you choice. So if you are in a Mthatha and the only university that is there doesn't offer what you want, you're able to actually have the freedom to move to another place that has a university that does have what you want. And that's incredibly important, because then you have students who aren't forced to stay in one geographic locale and aren't being forced by the university to go through a certain stream of things. And so it's very important that we get the funding right, we get the money right for our students, and we don't have these kind of strikes. But also it comes down to leadership, and it comes down to leadership of these institutions, like the SASCA president, to call in their students from being able to vandalize and from being able to disturb other students who are actually trying to learn at that time. And then the Democratic Alliance, when we are on campuses, we're able to protest and do just as much work in terms of getting our students into the classroom and into the NSFAS fabric without having to tear down and burn libraries and burn chapels. And in fact, how I got involved in politics was because of the NSFAS crisis that I saw happening at my university at Rhodes, and how I actually petitioned various parties to be able to help young people there. So you don't have to actually be part of a gang of people that is going to be looting and vandalizing students. We should be more responsible in that, and we should be courteous of other students that don't want to be disturbed in that respect. And it just comes down to responsibility of leaders and how they lead that institutions. And in fact, what they should be doing is petitioning the people that make those policies, like ministers, rather than going to the universities, which frankly don't have that much power at the end of the day. Once the money is gone, it's gone. Do you want me to close the statement now?
I'm going to allow you another chance to conclude just in just a moment, and you can respond to some of that in that conclusion.
So,
Lenny, I don't know if you want to pick up on anything any of the delegates have said, or should I move to the last question? Okay, our last question is our most dangerous question. It's a bit of a landmine, so I'm going to ask for a short and honest answer from you, please. Liam.
Good evening. We as young South Africans are the so-called born-free generation. How much longer do you intend to disadvantage white males when it comes to university entrance? And is this not an example of reverse apartheid?
I think quotas and such things are obviously a big issue in our school. The very wealthy advantage school, mainly white students. I'm actually going to start with Udeni. How do you feel about these sort of issues? Is this a fair practice? How long should it continue? Should it be happening at all?
I think the statement that BEE and affirmative action are reverse apartheid is a mistake. And It's a purely informed statement. With that statement, that's where I actually agree with the ANC. They are necessary to redress the wrongs of the past. They are. You probably won't believe this. I'm part of your age group. I'm the born free generation. So it is. So I fully agree with the ANC there to say it is necessary to redress the wrongs of the past. I can't see how we can do it in another way. It's not discriminating against white males in any way, but it's elevating the people that will previously disadvantaged, who are still kept at a low social level today.
Thank you. I can't help myself. Show me the white males who are suffering because of this, and then we can have a real discussion. But to the ruling party. Thank you. How long do we need this to carry on? When are we finally going to be at an equilibrium? Is there any plan for it? How does the government see this program moving forward?
Look, let me begin by saying there is a wrong narrative that is being communicated, particularly to the white community, that affirmative action, that redress policies and transformation is meant to ensure that we gatekeep for white communities. And by the way, in South Africa, white males are the major beneficiaries of the post-apartheid South Africa. In fact, you would be shocked to believe that employment equity and BEE have benefited, the people who have benefited since those policies have been introduced are white males. The economy in South Africa, the people who own the economy and who run the economy, the people who are in senior positions both in government and in the private sector are white males. They dominate. The crisis that we are faced with is white females and women as a whole. That's another issue that we don't speak a lot about. That's where the problems are. So we need to deal with them. So we do, and the results, the issues, because apartheid really promoted white males and white females are not promoted by apartheid in the main. But they did benefit from the crumbs, but they did not benefit, they were not affirmed by that system. So we need to affirm them. So the reality in South Africa is that there is no threat to white males. There must be a threat to narrow white supremacy. And I think all of us, including us in the white community, must be able to say, we can't have a sustainable system of white supremacy in South Africa. Because the reality is that, if you look at the demographics of South Africa, we've got more black people than whites. So if you're only going to focus your policies on securing and protecting the ownership and the supremacy of the white community, you are going to have a ticking time bomb. We're going to have an uprising in South Africa which is not in anyone's interest. So I think we need to all come to the party and really deal with the real issues. How long is it going to take us? I think we really need to first check socio-economic transformation in South Africa. If we can change the ownership of the economy, the control of the economy, there won't be a need for us to be talking about. For instance, in the funding model of higher education already we've started, because many black students are now in universities. We said the SASCO, remove the racial quota on funding, because government subsidizes every student, whether you're coming from a rich family or not. You're subsidized by government. About 60% of what is funded allocated to you as a student is coming from government. The reality is that that is allocated according to race, which has resulted in a situation where Rhodes, for instance, where you're coming from, you agree with me, has very few black students coming from the poor communities, but a lot of black students coming, and UCT and VEX, a lot of black students coming from affluent families. Now that's not what we wanted to do. We want to deal with the question of social class. So we must look at your socio-economic condition, whether you are black or whether you are white. If you are poor and working class, you must be able to access education. And that's what we are saying as a policy, but we are saying the reality in South Africa today is that a socio-economic question is racialized. The reality is that those who are rich are mainly white. So we need to have those policies to redress. But in the long term, we won't need to have these policies because we would have been able successfully to level the playing ground if we do radically transform the socio-economic question in South Africa, which the ANC wants to.
Bali, your thoughts?
That's not true. The SASCO and the ANC completely racialize acceptance into universities. And in fact, the Democratic Alliance has been at the forefront of saying that it should be merit-based and looking at people's disadvantage rather than their race. So, yeah, that's not true. The answer to your question about white males, frankly, I think it's something that the born-free generation is going to have a real discussion about, because we can't run away from where our country comes from. And so, as my two colleagues have said, we do need to look at readdressing the past mistakes of our governments and making sure that people that parents weren't able to access that and haven't been able to provide adequate access for their students, for their children, are able to now access university. But the Democratic Alliance doesn't see an option of it being either or. There's enough for everyone to be able to access. And it has to be based on merit, it has to be based on excellence, and it has to be based on disadvantage. And unfortunately in our country, disadvantage is racialized in that it's mostly black people that don't get that opportunity. But I would never sit here and advocate for the fact that if a young white student wants to work and get into university, that they should be excluded. And that's why we think we should look at quintiles, that's why we think we should look at what school you come from. So if a student from Clifton, for example, is competing with a school from Kwamashu and they get the same grades, the emphasis would be to get the child from Kwamashu to be able to get in first, but that's not based on racial, that's based on the disadvantages that they've received. And I think that that can be countered by the fact that if we actually had a government that was able to create enough space in these places and enough incentive to make sure that excellence was the criteria, that we'd have every single student being able to actually access university, and it wouldn't have to be a question about whether blacks or whites or whatever the case is, because frankly, the people sitting in this room had nothing to do with what happened in our past. And it's a sad reality, but it's not something that we need to say they should now be punished for it, which is why also as part of our BE and AA policies, we say that the private sector's government should also be saying, let's look at other scorecards, let's also introduce things that are going to make sure that when we say we have redress, we're also redressing for the people who haven't been able to access it because they've been kicked out, because they were previously advantaged. And I know that it's not something that people like to talk about because it makes it seem as though we want white people only to be still getting into access. But I don't think that any country is going to be going forward if we're saying that half our young people who are in part of a system that happened in our country should be left out of the economy either.
I just want to wonder about very quickly. On the issue, if you have, there's an example by if you have a student coming from a school in Bamash, a small one, and a student coming from Clifton, and they meet, both of them, the barometer must be whether they meet the minimum access requirement in university. And therefore, affirmative action would say, put in the student from Bamash. Don't compare them in terms of who got the highest grades. But if they meet the minimum requirements, and by the way, the requirements currently in our universities are very high. But the reality is that you're not going to have white people currently in the current system that we are being excluded in our universities. It's not happening. It's not anyway. But the DA has dismissed employment equity in the National Council of Provinces, so we don't know how today they say there's supposed to be some employment equity.
Right, folks, I'm going to sit there because over time I'm going to let you have a final word. Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is now a very brief closing statement. I'm going to start with Neni, then I'll move to Mbali, and then finally a representative from the ANC. What I really want to hear, you're welcome to pick up on one last point, but I'd really like to consider the debate closed. We're supposed to be finished now. What I'm asking is, Neni, anything from you, your impressions from this evening, from the delegates. If education is my main concern, 2 weeks from now, why should I be voting for you? You can think about that while Neni is giving his thoughts on our debate this evening. But I think you've got enough mic, so you can just, I'll sit with this one next to you.
Okay. Now, I just want to say thank you to both delegates of the parties for allowing me to be a part of this. It's been really interesting to listen to it. And listening through the young hearts, not through the media. So that's interesting.
Thank you very much for your participation. A round of applause for our panel. Statement to end off. We're not going to allow the debate to go, so try not to have a final dig if you can help it. Why am I voting for the DA on the 7th?
I think the Democratic Alliance has shown that as a party that's only been in government for 5 years, we've been able to deliver the kind of quality education, the kind of access to quality education that's really going to be preparing our young people to be people that are going to take this country forward. And I think if anyone cares about the system of education in our country and where our country is going, we want to make sure that you're voting for a party that is actually making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity and everybody is going to be able to contribute so that we all can actually make our country better. And I think that you must make sure that your vote is selfish this year by actually going out and looking at what all the parties offer, not just on education, but on anything else that really affects you, and taking and choosing the one that's best for you as a young person. Because we really need to honour the people that have come before us and afford for us to have this kind of freedom by making sure that we're actually going to have a future that's going to be in the hands of government that actually knows what it's doing.
Thank you very much.
made significant progress over the past 20 years. We've been able to ensure that more and more poor students are able to access higher education in South Africa and basic education. We provide 7 million young people with opportunity to study for free in our basic education level. NSFAS beneficiaries in the past 20 years have been 1.4 million, so we've been able to decisively ensure that we assist the working class and the poor, and that is the central issue that should occupy any South African. Going forward over the next 5 years, we'll be focusing on areas of quality. That is why we introduced the annual national assessment to really make an assessment where the challenges are. We've said we're going to improve on early childhood development. We've said we're going to ensure that we expand the office schools. We're going to expand the scholar transportation program. We're going to expand the school nutrition program. We've said we're going to open up two streams of basic education for students who want to do that more academic and those who want to do the vocational. We have said we're going to provide free education for our young people in South Africa. We have said also we're going to focus more on producing teachers that are in maths and science and technology that are going to be to ensure that in our poor and rural schools there is quality produced. We have said that in the next 5 years we will ensure that we increase workbooks for our students. We will ensure that we provide tablets to replace the whole challenge of distribution of textbooks so students have adequate resources. We have said we are going to ensure that we resource the classroom such that every student in South Africa has a true equal opportunity to quality education in South Africa. And if you really do care about education, try the African National Congress, which is tried and tested, which has admitted to some of the challenges that are in South Africa, which does not paint a glossy picture about South Africa like the others do in the Western Cape. We say, here are the challenges in South Africa, let's deal with them, let's have the community involved. Nobody must point fingers at the ANC, everybody must play a role in promoting education in South Africa. So we say to South Africans, vote the ANC.
So I'll be very, very brief in summing up. First of all, I've spoken a number of times about how lucky we are at Clifton. Guys, I'm not sure you realize how lucky we are to have these delegates with us this evening. These are quite important people. They're very busy with the elections. It really was a wonderful opportunity for us. So another round of applause. I'll talk to you all over the next few weeks about my thoughts. If you'd like to follow the debates, I think talk to Carol. He's following them on Twitter, and I know the debate rages all night and all through the day and all that sort of thing. My only comment is this. I think what I found particularly interesting from today, we kind of expected the differences of opinion. It was wonderful to see those points that we agreed on, and there were quite a few of them, and that's how we built the nation. Thank you. May your gods bless you. Tip your car guard. Have a great evening. Thank you once again. Thank you so much for being with us.